The fog came down early that evening, thick and gray, rolling over the hills like something alive. Han Do-hyun pulled his collar up against the cold and walked the perimeter of his property, the way he did every night, before dark. His boots crunched on frozen dirt. His breath came out in small white clouds. The traps along the eastern fence were empty again. Nothing had come through in weeks. Even the animals were leaving this place. Yeren 4 was dying, not in any dramatic way. No explosions, no war. Just a slow, quiet emptying. The mining company had pulled out 2 years ago. The families followed, then the traders, then the supply ships stopped coming on schedule. Now there were maybe 40 people left on the whole moon, scattered across settlements that had once held thousands. His homestead sat at the edge of a deep ravine, where the fog pooled like milk. And beyond that, there was nothing but rock and silence for 100 kilometers. He did not mind the silence. He had chosen it. He was checking the last trap near the ravine when he heard the sound. It came from below, somewhere deep in the fog. A high, thin cry. Not a scream, not a bird, something in between. It rose and fell and rose again, and it sounded so much like a child that Do-hyun's hands wet still on the trap wire. He stood and listened. The sound came again, then it split into 2 voices, then 3, layered on top of each other in a way that made his chest tight. Do-hyun knew the frontier rules. He had memorized them during his years as a colonial ranger. Rule 7 said, never approach unknown xenofauna. Rule 12 said, never touch biological material of unidentified origin. Rule 23 said if you hear something in the dark that you cannot explain, go home, lock the door, and report it in the morning. He started climbing down into the ravine. The rocks were slippery with frost, and the fog made everything shapeless. He used his hands to feel his way down, grabbing roots and ledges, his old knees complaining with every drop. The crying was louder now, closer. It echoed off the stone walls and seemed to come from everywhere at once. He found them under a collapsed shelf of rock near the bottom. 3 small creatures, huddled together in a space barely large enough for a dog. They looked like wolves, silver fur, long limbs, pointed ears pressed flat against their skulls. But they were not wolves. Their fur had a faint shimmer to it, like light trapped under ice. Their eyes, when they looked up at him, were pale gold and far too aware. These were not the blank eyes of an animal. Something was looking back at him. The smallest one was pressed against the stone wall, shivering so hard its whole body shook. Its ribs were showing through its fur. All 3 of them were thin, starving. Do-hyun crouched in the mud and did not move. He let them look at him. He let them smell the air around him. The 2 larger ones growled, low and weak, but the small one just stared at him with those golden eyes and made a sound that was not a growl. It was a whimper. Quiet. Tired. The sound of something that had been crying for a long time and did not have much left. He took off his coat. It was the heavy one, the one lined with thermal fabric that his wife had bought him years ago, back when there was still someone to buy him things. He spread it on the ground, in front of the creatures, and waited. The small one moved first. It crawled forward, belly low to the ground, and sniffed the coat. Then it crawled onto it and lay down, pressing its face into the fabric. The other 2 followed. They curled around each other on his coat, and the growling stopped. Do-hyun gathered the coat around them, all 3, and lifted them against his chest. They weighed almost nothing. He could feel their hearts beating, fast and fragile, through the fabric. The climb back up was harder with his arms full, and no coat against the cold. By the time he reached the top, his fingers were numb and his shoulders ached, but the creatures were warm against him, and the small one had stopped shivering. His homestead was a low, square building made of reinforced composite panels. It was not pretty. It was built to survive storms and cold, and the occasional tremor from the moon's unstable core. Inside, it was warm. He had a wood-burning stove that he kept fed with dried root fiber, and the orange light from it filled the single main room. He set the creatures down on a blanket near the stove. They blinked in the light, dazed, their golden eyes reflecting the fire. The two larger ones pressed together and watched him. The small one tried to stand, wobbled, and fell. Do-hyun went to the kitchen. He mixed rehydrated protein powder with warm water and a little salt, stirring it into a thin broth. He poured it into 3 shallow bowls and set them on the floor. The creatures did not need encouragement. They drank with desperate speed, lapping at the broth until the bowls were empty, then licking the bowls across the floor. Do-hyun refilled them. They drank again and again. When they were done, the larger two curled up by the stove and fell asleep almost instantly. It crawled across the floor to where Do-hyun sat in his chair and pawed at his boot. He reached down and picked it up. It fit in one hand. It pressed its nose against his neck and let out a long, shuddering breath, and then it went limp in his arms, asleep. Do-hyun sat there for a long time, holding it. The fire crackled. The wind pushed against the walls outside. He told himself he would release them in the morning. He would carry them back to the ravine and let them go, and that would be the end of it. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. He looked down at the small creature in his hand. Its fur was warm under his fingers. Its heartbeat was steady now, slow and trusting. He was not going to release them in the morning. He already knew that. Outside, high above the fog, something moved across the sky. It was too slow for a meteor and too steady for a satellite. A long streak of pale light that crossed from one horizon to the other, silent and deliberate. If Do-hyun had been outside, he might have noticed it. He might have wondered what it was. But he was inside, by the fire, with a sleeping creature in his arms, and he was not looking at the sky. He was looking at the 3 small lives he had carried out of the dark, and he was already thinking about what to feed them tomorrow. Far above, the Hanvari search cruiser completed its sweep, and moved on to the next sector. It had not found what it was looking for. Not yet. The days turned into weeks, and Do-hyun stopped pretending he was going to let them go. He named them on the 3rd day. The biggest one, the one that was always first to the food and always biting at his boots when he walked, he called Bomi. She was bold and loud and had no fear of anything. The middle one, who hung back and watched everything with careful, calculating eyes before making a move, he called Taeho. And the small one, the runt, the one that slept curled against his chest every night and followed him from room to room like a shadow, he called Isul. They ate twice a day at first, then 3 times. Then Do-hyun realized 3 times was not enough. They were growing, not slowly the way animals grow, but fast, unsettlingly fast. In the first week, they doubled in size. By the second week, Bomi was the size of a large dog, and Taeho was not far behind. Even Isul, the smallest, grew until she no longer fit in one hand. Their fur changed too. The silver became brighter, cleaner, and patterns began to appear in it. Faint lines and swirls that looked like the star maps Do-hyun had used during his ranger days. At night, when the lights were off and only the stove glowed, the patterns shimmered faintly, like light moving underwater. Do-hyun told himself it was bioluminescence, some kind of natural glow. Many creatures on frontier moons had it. He told himself a lot of things during those weeks. The strange thing started small. His radio, which had not worked properly in months, began picking up signals. Not static, not colony broadcasts, something else. A low, rhythmic pulse that came and went, in a language that sounded like singing and mathematics at the same time. Do-hyun turned the radio off. When he turned it back on an hour later, the signal was gone. Then the lights. His overhead lamp flickered whenever Bomi got excited. Just a flicker, barely noticeable, but it happened every time. Taeho would sit in the corner and stare at the wall, and the wall panel behind him would hum, as if the electrical current inside it was responding to his attention. The worst was the night Dohyun woke up to the sound of Bomi growling. Not her playful growl, a deep, serious sound that vibrated the floor. He got up and found her standing by the window, fur raised, eyes fixed on the dark outside. Something had moved out there. A shadow, a shape. Bomi opened her mouth, and a pulse of white light shot from her jaws. It hit the dirt outside the window and burned a line across the ground, thin and precise, like a laser cut. The soil smoked. Dohyun stood in the doorway and stared at the scorch mark for a long time. Then he patted Bomi on the head, said "Good girl," and went back to bed. He did not sleep. Kwon Jinha came the next week. He flew in on his old cargo shuttle, the one that leaked coolant and rattled on landing, and he brought supplies, dried food, fuel cells, medical packs. He had been making these runs to Dahan for years, ever since everyone else had left. He was the closest thing Dahan had to a friend. Jinha saw the creatures, and his face went white. He stood in the doorway and watched Bomi tear apart a piece of dried meat, while Taeho circled his legs, sniffing. Isul was asleep on Dahan's chair, which she had claimed as her own. Jinha spoke quietly, like he was afraid the creatures would hear him. He asked Dahan what they were. Dahan said he did not know. Jinha asked where they came from. Dahan said the ravine. Jinha asked if Dahan had lost his mind. Dahan poured him tea and said nothing. Jinha told him the news. Something big was happening in the sector. A fleet had appeared. Not human. Not any known species. Hundreds of ships. Massive ones. Moving through the frontier in a grid pattern. They were scanning every planet, every moon, every rock. No communication. No threats. No demands. Just silent, systematic searching. 2 colonies had already been evacuated, as a precaution. The military was on alert, but had no idea what they were dealing with. Jinha looked at the creatures again. He looked at the scorch mark outside the window that Dohyun had not cleaned up. He told Dohyun to come with him, to leave the moon, to leave the creatures behind. Dohyun shook his head. He said the pups needed him. Jinha left angry. Dohyun watched his shuttle climb into the gray sky until it disappeared. 3 days later, Isul got sick. It started with a tremble, a fine, constant shaking that would not stop. Then her fur began to glow. Not the faint shimmer Dohyun had gotten used to, but a hard, bright white that hurt to look at. She would not eat. She lay on her side and panted, and the air around her was hot enough to make Dohyun sweat. He called Baeksumi. She was the settlement medic, the only one left, stationed at the main hub 30 kilometers east. She came on a ground transport, carrying her scanner kit, expecting to treat a sick animal. She scanned Isul and stopped talking. She ran the scan again, then a third time. She put the scanner down and sat on the floor, and looked at Dohyun with an expression he had never seen on her face before. She told him these were not animals. The cellular energy density in Isul's body was beyond anything in human biological records. Each cell was producing energy at a rate that should be impossible for organic matter. The readings were closer to a stellar core than a living creature. Sumi said she did not know what they were, but they were not from anywhere near this part of the galaxy. Maybe not from this galaxy at all. He nodded. Then he asked Sumi if she could bring the fever down. She stared at him. She asked if he had heard what she just said. He said he heard her. He asked again about the fever. Sumi helped him. They used cold compresses and a mild sedative from her kit, adjusted for Isul's strange biology as best they could guess. It took hours. Bomi and Taeho sat on either side of their sister the entire time, pressed against her, their fur dimming and brightening in rhythm with her breathing. By morning, the fever broke. Isul opened her golden eyes and licked Do-hyun's hand, and he let out a breath he had been holding for 12 hours. Sumi packed her kit and stood at the door. She said, whatever these creatures were, something out there was looking for them, and when it found them, being careful might not be enough. Do-hyun thanked her for coming. That night, he sat on his porch with a cup of tea and watched the three of them play in the yard. Bomi chased Taeho through the fog, while Isul hopped after them on unsteady legs, recovered but still wobbly. Their fur caught the last light of the setting sun and threw it back in silver sparks. They looked like living stars tumbling through the mist. Above, hidden by cloud cover, a Hanvari scanning beam swept across the settlement. It paused over a small homestead at the edge of a ravine. It detected 3 energy signatures that matched its search parameters. Then it moved on, sending its data upward through the atmosphere, through the ships in orbit, through relay stations between star systems, all the way to a flagship at the center of the fleet, to a throne of compressed light, to a mother who had been searching for a very long time. Do-hyun finished his tea and went inside to prepare the evening broth. Extra salt for Isul. The flagship had no name. It did not need one. There was only one. It moved through space like a wound in the dark, a shape that was part ship and part living thing. Its hull was smooth and black and curved like bone, and it stretched across 400 kilometers from bow to stern. Smaller ships flew around it in formation, thousands of them, but they looked like insects next to the thing they served. When the flagship passed between a planet and its sun, the planet went dark for 11 minutes. Inside, the corridors were silent. Not quiet, silent. The Hanvari who served aboard the ship walked without sound, communicated without sound, lived their lives in a stillness that would have driven a human insane within hours. They were tall, 3 meters or more, with skin like polished black stone, and eyes that held no pupils. They moved with a precision that made them look mechanical, but they were not machines. And they were terrified. Not of the enemy, not of the frontier, not of the unknown species they kept scanning on these small, cold worlds. They were afraid of the one who sat at the center of the ship. Nara had not spoken in 3 days. This was normal. She sometimes went weeks without words. Her advisors had learned to read her moods from other signs. The temperature in the throne chamber, the behavior of light near her body, the way nearby stars responded to her presence. Right now, the temperature was falling. The light bent toward her like water flowing downhill. And in a system 4 light-years away, a yellow star had begun to flicker. She was angry. Nara's form was difficult to look at directly. She appeared humanoid when she chose to, but the edges of her were wrong. Her outline shifted. Her shadow pointed in directions that did not match the light sources. When she moved, there was a delay, as if the space around her needed a moment to adjust to whatever she had become. She was old, not old the way humans measured it, not centuries, longer. She had existed when some of the stars in this region were still dust. She had watched civilizations rise on young worlds, spread across their systems, and then go silent, the way all small things eventually did. She did not hate them. She did not love them. They were weather. They came and went. But her children were not weather. Her children were everything. There had been 3 of them, young, so impossibly young, barely formed, still shifting between their birth shapes and their true selves. They could not yet speak, could not yet fold light, could not yet step between stars the way she could. They were helpless, and they were hers, and someone had taken them. The rival faction had called themselves the Ash Veil. They believed Nara's rule had lasted too long. They believed the Dominion needed new blood. They had tried to kill her and failed, because killing Nara was like trying to kill gravity. So instead, They had taken her children as leverage. Nara had not negotiated. She had not sent envoys or demands. She had gone to the Ashvale's home system personally. When she left, the system had 2 fewer planets than it had before. The faction was gone, but so were her children. Their life pods, launched during the chaos, had scattered into uncharted space, into the frontier, into the dark. That was 11 months ago. Nara had been searching ever since. She had already visited 2 other civilizations during her search. Small ones, young ones, species that had barely learned to leave their own atmospheres. She had scanned their worlds and found nothing. And she had not been gentle about it. The scanning process itself had disrupted magnetic fields, collapsed infrastructure. One civilization would recover in a few generations. The other would not. Nara's advisors did not bring this up. They understood that to her, this was not cruelty. It was scale. A human might step on an anthill while searching for a lost child and never notice. Nara was operating at the same level of attention. These worlds, these species, these tiny lives, they simply did not register against the weight of what she had lost. Her chief commander, a Hanvari named Gol, approached the throne. He walked with his head down and his arms at his sides, the posture of absolute submission. He told her that the scanning teams had found a match. 3 energy signatures on a small moon in a minor system. The signatures were young and unstable, but consistent with her children's biopatterns. Nara stood. The temperature in the chamber dropped so sharply that frost formed on Gol's armor. She asked which moon. He told her. She asked what species lived there. He told her. Humans. A young species, barely spacefaring, scattered across a handful of frontier systems. No significant military, no significant technology, no threat. Nara did not care about the species. She ordered the fleet to converge. On the surface of Yeren 4, Do-hyun noticed the sky was wrong. He was sitting on his porch after dinner, the way he always did. Bomi was chewing on a piece of wood at his feet. Taeho was somewhere behind the house, doing whatever Taeho did when he wanted to be alone. Isul was in his lap, half asleep, her warm weight pressed against his stomach. The stars were moving. Not the slow drift of satellites or the quick streak of meteors. These lights moved with purpose. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They appeared at the edge of the sky and crossed in straight lines toward a point directly overhead, as if the whole galaxy was converging on this one forgotten moon. Do-hyun watched them. His chest felt tight. The old ranger instinct, the one he had tried to bury under years of quiet farming, was waking up. Something was coming. Something too big for traps and fences and a locked door. His settlement radio crackled. It had been silent for weeks, but now a voice came through, broken and full of static. It was the automated emergency system from the main hub. Unidentified fleet in high orbit. All settlers advised to shelter in place. Do not attempt communication. This is not a drill. The message repeated twice and then cut to static. Bomi stopped chewing. She stood, fur raised, and stared upward. A low sound came from her throat. Not a growl, but something deeper. Something that vibrated in Do-hyun's bones. Taeho came running from behind the house and pressed against the front door, whining. His patterns were flaring, the star maps on his fur pulsing with frantic light. Isul burrowed deeper into Do-hyun's lap. She pushed her face against his shirt and made a sound he had never heard from her before. A small, frightened cry, muffled against his body. She was shaking. Do-hyun put his hand on her back. He held it there, steady and warm, until her shaking slowed. Then he stood up. He carried Isul inside. He called Bomi and Taeho and closed the door. He locked it. He went to the cabinet by the kitchen and took out his old service rifle. It was a simple weapon, outdated by decades, but it was clean and loaded because Do-hyun maintained his tools. He sat down in his chair, with the rifle across his knees, and Isul in the crook of his arm, and Bomi and Teho pressed against his legs, and he waited. Outside, the sky filled with light. The fog burned away. For the first time in years, the sky over Yeren 4 was clear, and what Do-hyun saw through his window was not stars, hundreds of them, vast and dark, hanging in the atmosphere like mountains turned upside down. And then one of them, a shuttle, small compared to the others, but still larger than anything Do-hyun had ever seen, broke away from the formation and began to descend, straight down, toward his homestead. Do-hyun tightened his grip on the rifle and whispered to the three creatures pressed against him that it was going to be fine. He did not believe it, but he said it anyway, because that is what you do when the ones you love are afraid. The shuttle landed in the field beyond Do-hyun's fence. It came down slow, like it was being careful, but the weight of it still cracked the frozen ground, and sent dust and ice rising in a ring. The engine sound was not like human engines. It was low and smooth, more like a heartbeat than a machine, and it made the walls of the homestead hum. Before the dust settled, they came out. Soldiers, tall ones, taller than any human Do-hyun had ever seen. They wore armor that looked like it had been grown rather than built, black and smooth, and fitted to their bodies like a second skin. Their faces were dark, featureless, with eyes that reflected light the way deep water does. They moved in a column, 12 of them, each one carrying a weapon that Do-hyun did not recognize, but understood instinctively. You did not need to know the science to know what a gun looked like. They walked toward his homestead with the calm, unhurried pace of something that had never been afraid of anything. Do-hyun was already on the porch. He had come out before they landed. He had set Isul inside with Bomi and Teho, and closed the door behind him. And now he stood on the wooden boards of his porch, with his old rifle held across his chest, and his boots planted, and his jaw set. He looked small. He knew he looked small. One man, one old coat, one outdated weapon, standing in front of a homestead on a moon that nobody cared about. The soldiers reached the fence. The one in front, larger than the others by a full head, raised a device near his throat and spoke. The words came out in broken, clumsy human language, clearly translated in real time. The voice was flat and mechanical. You have in your keeping 3 beings of the Hanvari Dominion. You will step away. You will not be harmed. Do-hyun looked at the soldiers, 12 of them, armed, armored. Behind them, the shuttle. Above them, the fleet. Behind the fleet, an empire that stretched across more stars than he could count. He said no. The soldiers stopped. The lead one tilted his head, the first non-mechanical gesture any of them had made. He spoke again. You do not understand. This is not a request. Do-hyun said he understood fine. He said those 3 were under his protection. He said nobody was taking them anywhere. The silence that followed was the kind that comes before a storm. The soldiers advanced past the fence. Do-hyun raised the rifle and fired once into the dirt at their feet. The shot cracked the air and kicked up a spray of frozen soil. The soldiers stopped again, not because the shot was dangerous. A single human rifle round could not scratch their armor. They stopped because they could not process what was happening. Their training, their experience, their understanding of how the universe worked, none of it included a scenario where a single unaugmented biological creature fired a weapon at a Hanvari military column, and then stood there, waiting. The lead soldier began to speak again, but he did not finish. The air changed. It was not wind. It was not temperature. It was something else entirely. The light itself seemed to bend, pulling toward a single point in the sky above the homestead. The soldiers looked up. Even through their featureless faces, Do-hyun could see something shift. Their posture changed, their weapons lowered, they stepped back. She came down like a falling star. There was no shuttle this time, no ship, just light, collapsing from the sky, and a column so bright that Do-hyun's vision whited out for a moment, and his ears filled with a sound like the ringing of a bell, the size of a planet. The ground cracked beneath the point of impact. The fence posts nearest to her splintered and flew outward. When his vision cleared, she was standing in his yard. Nara, the Star Sovereign. She was shaped like a woman, mostly. Tall, taller than the soldiers, with features that looked carved from pale light. Her hair moved on its own, drifting upward as if she were underwater. And it was not hair. It was something bright and shifting, like a slow-motion solar flare. Her eyes were gold, the same gold as the pups, but deeper, older. When she turned them on Do-hyun, he felt the weight of them in his skull, as if her gaze alone was pressing against his thoughts. She radiated power the way a furnace radiates heat. It was physical. Do-hyun's skin prickled, his teeth ached, his vision blurred at the edges when he looked at her too long. The boards of his porch groaned under a gravity that was coming from her. She was looking past him, at the door. She could feel them inside. 11 months of searching, of burning across the galaxy, of tearing apart every obstacle. And now they were 20 meters away, behind a wooden door, in a house made of composite panels. Her expression cracked. Not anger, not relief. Something in between that was bigger than both. Her mouth opened slightly. Her hands, which were not quite solid at the edges, reached forward. Do-hyun stepped into her path. He did not aim the rifle at her. He was not that foolish. He held it across his chest with both hands, the way a man holds a bar across a doorway. A barrier. A statement. He looked up at this being that could crush moons and eat stars, and he said, in a voice that was steady, despite everything his body was telling him, "I don't know who you are, but you're scaring them." Nara froze. For 300 years, nothing in the known galaxy had surprised her. She had seen species beg. She had seen fleets scatter. She had seen entire worlds go silent at her approach. But she had never seen a creature this small, this fragile, this impossibly outmatched step in front of her and refuse to move. She studied him. She saw the rifle, ancient and useless. She saw the coat, patched and worn. She saw his hands, scarred from work, steady from will. And she saw his eyes, afraid but unmoving, and she recognized something in them that she had not expected to find on a world this small. He was not fighting her. He was protecting them, the same way she was trying to reach them. They were doing the same thing from different sides of the same door. Behind him, the door opened. Bomi pushed through first, shoving her silver body past the frame. Taeho followed, cautious as always. And then Isil, small Isil, who came last, pressing against Do-hyun's leg for a moment, before she saw the figure standing in the yard. All three of them went still. Their golden eyes went wide, and then, together, they ran. They ran past Do-hyun, across the porch, down the steps, across the cracked dirt, and threw themselves at Nara. They climbed her. They pressed their faces into her neck. They made sounds that were not whimpers and not growls, but something high and desperate and full of recognition. The sound of children who had found their mother, after a very long time, in the dark. Nara caught them. She held them against her body, and the light around her softened. The terrible pressure that had been crushing the air eased. The cracked ground stopped trembling. For a moment, the Star Sovereign, the ruler of 1,000 star systems, was just a woman holding her children, and the gold in her eyes was not power. It was tears. Do-hyun lowered his rifle. He set the butt on the porch floor, and rested his hands on the barrel, and watched. Then Nara looked at him. The children were in her arms, safe, found, returned. There was nothing left to do here. Her fleet was waiting. Her empire was waiting. This moon, this man, this tiny moment was finished. But Isul kept looking back at him. She twisted in her mother's arms and stared at Do-hyun with those golden eyes, and she made the sound, the small sound, the one she made every night when she wanted to be picked up, when she wanted to be held. Nara saw this. She looked at her daughter. She looked at the man on the porch. She saw the things her advisors would never notice. The bowls by the door, still half full of broth. The blanket on the chair, covered in silver fur. The worn patches on his coat, where small bodies had pressed against him, night after night. Her chief commander stepped forward. He said they should depart. The children were recovered. The mission was complete. This world was irrelevant. Nara raised one hand, and the commander went silent. She asked Do-hyun a question. Her voice was not translated by a machine. It came from her directly, and it shook the air like distant thunder. She asked him why. Why did he take them in? Why did he feed them? Why did he stand here, alone, against soldiers and ships and an empire, for creatures that were not his kind? Do-hyun stood on his porch and thought about it. Not for long. He said they were hungry. He said they were small. He said that was enough. Nara stared at him. The silence stretched across the yard, across the broken fence, up through the atmosphere, all the way to the fleet hanging in orbit. She did not move for a long time. The fleet did not fire. The soldiers withdrew. The shuttle lifted off and climbed back into the sky, and one by one the great dark ships began to drift upward, pulling away from Yeren 4 like a tide going out. By morning, the sky was empty again, gray and quiet, with nothing in it but fog and the pale light of a distant sun. Do-hyun slept badly that night. The homestead felt too quiet. No paws clicking on the floor. No warm weight against his chest. No soft breathing in the dark. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling, and listened to the wind push against the walls. And he told himself this was what he wanted. Quiet. Solitude. The life he had chosen, after everything else was taken from him. He did not believe it, but he said it to himself anyway. The next morning, he got up before dawn and did what he always did. He checked the traps. He fed the stove. He made tea. He tried not to look at the 3 empty bowls still sitting by the workshop door. She came at midday, not with the fleet, not with soldiers, not with light bending and ground cracking and the weight of an empire behind her. She came alone, walking across the field from the east, and she looked almost human. Almost. She was still tall, still beautiful in the way that things beyond understanding are beautiful. But she had pulled herself inward. The edges of her were steady. Her hair fell down instead of drifting up. Her feet touched the ground and left prints in the mud, which felt like a deliberate choice, like she had decided to be heavy for a little while. She carried Isul in her arms. Do-hyun saw them from the porch. He set down his tea and stood up and watched them approach. His heart did something complicated that he did not have words for. Nara stopped at the fence, the one the soldiers had walked through the night before. Some of the posts were broken, snapped during her arrival. She looked at them. Then she looked at Do-hyun. Then she stepped through the gap, carefully, the way a guest enters someone's home. She set Isul down. Isul hit the ground and ran. She crossed the yard in 3 bounds and threw herself at Do-hyun's legs, climbing him, pressing her nose into his neck, making the sound she always made, the one that meant, pick me up, the one that meant, safe. Do-hyun picked her up. She was heavier now than she had been yesterday, already growing, already becoming something he could not hold for much longer. But right now, she fit in his arms, and her fur was warm, and she licked his chin, and he closed his eyes and held her. Nara watched this. She stood in the broken yard of a homestead on a forgotten moon and watched a human hold her daughter, and something moved across her face that her advisors and commanders and the billion subjects of her empire had never seen. She looked uncertain. She spoke, not in the booming, air-shaking voice from the night before. Quietly, through a small translation device she wore at her throat, the words came in simple human language. She told him what she was. She said she was old. She said she ruled many worlds. She said her children were young, the youngest beings of her kind in existence, and that they would grow into something vast. Bomi would one day command fleets. Teho would govern systems. Isul, the smallest, the gentlest, would one day shepherd a region of space larger than the distance between this moon and the nearest galaxy. She said that her children had been taken from her, that their escape pods had scattered across the frontier, that she had been searching for 11 months, and that during that search she had done things that left scars on civilizations. She did not apologize for this. She simply stated it, the way one might state the weather. Then she said that when she found her children, she had expected many things. She had expected them to be hurt. She had expected them to be afraid. She had expected to find them in cages, or in laboratories, or in the hands of someone trying to use them. She had not expected to find them fed, warm, named, and loved. She had not expected a man with a rifle to stand between her and them, not to keep them from her, but to protect them from anything that might scare them. She had not expected Isul to cry when she was carried away from him. Do-hyun listened to all of this. He scratched Isul behind the ears the way she liked. He said he was glad they were safe. He said he was glad their mother found them. Nara asked him what he wanted. She said she could give him anything. Technology that would make him the most powerful human alive. Wealth and forms his species had not invented yet. A planet. A place in her court, if he wished it. Anything. Do-hyun looked around his homestead. The cracked walls, the patched roof, the stove that burned root fiber because he could not afford fuel cells, the empty traps and the dead gardens and the fog that never lifted. He said he had his homestead. He said that was enough. Nara studied him for a long time. Then she made a sound that might have been a laugh, soft and low, and for a moment she looked almost like a person. Just a woman standing in a yard, shaking her head at a stubborn man. She took Isul back, gently. Isul went to her mother, but she looked over Nara's shoulder at Do-hyun, and she made the small sound one more time. Do-hyun raised his hand and waved, which was a silly human thing to do, but he did it anyway. Nara turned to leave. She took 3 steps. Then she stopped. Without turning around, she said one more thing. She said that she would remember him. She said that among her kind, memory was not like human memory. It did not fade. It did not change. What she remembered, she carried with her for as long as she existed. And she would exist for a very long time. She said she would remember that on a small, cold moon at the edge of nowhere, a human man found 3 hungry children and fed them without knowing what they were. And when an empire came for them, he stood on his porch and said no. She said this was something worth remembering. Then she walked across the field and the light took her, and she was gone. The weeks that followed were quiet. Do-hyun went back to his routine, traps, farming, tea on the porch. The homestead was empty again, the way it had been before, but the bowls were still by the door, and the blanket on the chair still had silver fur on it. And sometimes at night, Do-hyun thought he could hear the echo of small paws on the floor. Kwon Jin-ha came a month later, and he was not calm. He landed his shuttle hard and came running to the porch with his hands waving and his voice loud. He said the galaxy had gone crazy. He said the Hanvari Dominion, the empire nobody had even known existed until recently, had made formal contact with the Human Federation. Not a threat, not a demand. A treaty. A full diplomatic treaty, offering trade, protection, technology sharing, and military alliance. Humanity, a minor species on the edge of mapped space, was being offered a seat at the table of the largest empire in the known galaxy. Nobody understood why. The diplomats were confused, the military analysts were suspicious. Every expert, every politician, every talking head on every news channel had a theory, and none of them were right. Jinha asked Do-hyun if he had heard the news. Do-hyun said he had not. Jinha told him everything, talking fast, pacing the porch. He said some people thought it was a trap. Others thought humanity had done something to earn it. Some secret negotiation, some hidden contact that nobody knew about. Do-hyun sipped his tea. He said that was interesting. Jinha stared at him. He looked at the broken fence posts. He looked at the scorch marks on the ground. He looked at the 3 bowls still sitting by the workshop door. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. He asked Do-hyun if he knew something. Do-hyun said he did not know anything. He said he was just a farmer on a quiet moon. He offered Jinha more tea. Jinha left that evening, still confused, still full of questions. Do-hyun watched his shuttle climb into the sky and disappear. That night, Do-hyun did what he had done every night since they left. He made 3 bowls of broth. He seasoned them with salt, extra in the smallest one. He carried them out to the porch and set them in a row by the railing. And then he sat in his chair and looked up at the sky. The fog was thin tonight. He could see stars, thousands of them, scattered across the dark like dust on black water. He did not know which ones belonged to the Hanvari Dominion. He did not know which system Nara had taken her children back to. He did not know if Bomi was still bold, if Taeho was still careful, if Isul still liked her food with extra salt. He sat there for a long time, looking up. And then, far above, 1 star pulsed. Just once. A single soft flare of gold light, there and gone, like a heartbeat, like a blink, like a hand waving back. Do-hyun smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that comes when you know something the rest of the world doesn't know, and you are fine with that. He picked up his tea and went inside. The porch light stayed on, casting a warm circle on the wooden boards, and the 3 bowls sat cooling in the night air, untouched, but not unwanted. Above, the stars turned slowly in the dark, watching over a quiet house on a forgotten moon where a man had once fed wolf children because they were hungry, and in doing so, without knowing it, without wanting anything for it, had saved his entire species. The Star Sovereign remembered.